It's good to see you this morning. To bring the lights up, it's good to be back with you. We got a pocket of people missing right here, all right? So if you decide to like to sit in the middle, all right, we'll let you do that here in about 2 seconds, all right? Move at it, have some fun, and there's no takers. All right, that's good. It's good to see you back with you. Been gone for a few weeks this last month, off and on. Been actually gone more than here, even in Topeka, I think. And so I've been spending some time sabbatical-wise, and spent some time with God, spending some time with my family and with some other church leaders, and it's been good. And thank you for allowing me to do that. It's been healthy, it's been profitable, I believe. And today we're wrapping up our Bold series from the month of July. And today we're talking about, it's very fitting, I think, we're talking about bold rest. And as I come back from this time of sabbatical, there's a lot that I think God has spoken into me as I look and see what this idea of rest is. I pray that this message series of Bold has been good spiritual food for you as we look at what it means to live boldly for Christ. Is that God doesn't call us to live in some timid fashion, not in an arrogant, loud-mouthed way, but with confidence in the fact that Christ is who He says He is, and He's the one that saved and has redeemed us. But as you know, and maybe you feel this way, is as you move from being transformed from God, move from being a spectator to an active player in the game, if you will. It can become overwhelming, right? When you start walking around the world and you start seeing the fact of the task that is at hand, the amount that is meant to be done, what God has called us to as a church, as disciples of His, what we're to speak to, what we're supposed to proclaim. And as we begin doing that, I think it's fair to say you begin seeing that the brokenness in our world is broken. There's brokenness everywhere and all over the place. And the more that we see that brokenness, you can develop this sense of being overwhelmed a little bit. And I think it's interesting. I come back from sabbatical. What a week to come back, right? In the last couple of weeks, we've had the church shootings in South Carolina. We have the idea of gay marriage now and homosexual marriage in the country. We have people who are talking about the Confederate flag still. That's a hot topic issue, right? It seems like society has pulled out 3 different things and threw them all on there, and Satan's stirring the pot. And as a church, as Christians, what do we do? How do we respond? What are we to say? What are we not to say? And what are we to do? What are we not to do? And that feeling of being overwhelmed, of being consumed by the brokenness of the world, it can be overwhelming. And I just wanted to tell you this morning, I think that feeling of overload can be a natural one. It's one that has happened for people for generations of times. That when believers begin living out their faith and they move from the chairs to the community and begin seeing the brokenness and the need for Jesus, is that it's okay to have that sense of kind of like, I don't know what to do. Today I encourage you to grab your Bibles or your devices and turn to Mark chapter 6 is where we're going to be today. And in Mark chapter 6 we see that there's this moment where the disciples are having a conversation with Jesus. They've been sent out to do ministry, and they come back to Jesus. And they're like, hey, look what we've done, Jesus. Like, there's some good things that we've experienced, some good things we've been able to teach. And we pick it up in Mark 6, verse 30. It says this: the apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to Him all they had done and taught. Then because of so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat. He said to them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. It's interesting there. What does He call as the prescription of that being overwhelmed, or that there's a lot going on? He says it wasn't more sleeping pills, right? It wasn't the idea of having more medication. It wasn't the idea of even a nap. He says, come with me and church, remember this word, get rest. Come with me and rest. You see, we see this morning is that we're going to talk about this idea of bold rest. But I don't know if you've ever had that moment like the disciples had in this time, where all of a sudden that they have been going and they've been living, and all of a sudden it says that they didn't even have time to eat, right? Jesus noticed that. You know, I don't know about you, but you ever got up in that day where you shove a bagel in your mouth, you slam coffee down your throat, and all of a sudden that's at 7 in the morning, and then 10 o'clock comes at night, and you go, man, why am I so hungry, right? And you realize it's because your day has been so busy, you've been so hectic, you have just not even taken time to eat. You see, we see this is that when the people of this ministry, in their ministry, they begin to come and go. When we see that in our own lives, we begin seeing the fact that when God's message is proclaimed and people begin taking that in, they go and share that with their families, right? They go and share that with their friends, with the people around. And as they share those things, then they begin bringing their friends. And so the ministry is not slowing down for the disciples. They went out and they lived it out, and now it's growing, and it begins to take its shape. And all of a sudden it comes to the point where there's no turning back. You see, we don't have to go deep in today's passage to see what Jesus' prescription was for their busyness and what their prescription was for that sense of being overwhelmed. He says to them again, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest. You see, now in the midst of a storm, is it fair to say it seems a little bit laughable? When my life is busy and the phone's ringing at the office and there's 1,000 things that I'm supposed to be doing, the last thing I think of is rest, right? If I had time to rest, I wouldn't be at the point I was at, right? Is that you're asking me to come rest. I don't have time to rest. If I did, I would already have done it. But that's what Jesus says to them. He says, come and rest. This last month, as I've been processing through it, took some time to journal. I looked over the last 4.5, 5 years and calculated that I've written and preached about 230 some sermons. Okay, most of those are twice. Yeah, preached those twice each week. Looked at the amount of how many weddings, the amount of funerals within the church, and there's counseling, premarital counseling, other counseling in the church and outside the church. There's speaking engagements outside the church. There's those who need something ins and outs and outs. And all of a sudden I looked at it and go, wow, I understand why God calls you to rest. It's because you forget, and we forget what it is that's going on in your life in the moment. That He says you need to come and rest. I don't share those things as a note of martyrdom. In fact, most all those things I really truly enjoyed doing and being a part of. But there's a few I look back on and say, man, God, why did you ask me to be a part of that, right? Like, that wasn't so fun. That wasn't a high moment in my year. But I have to tell you, if I understood and practiced rest better from here on out, I believe there will be less unenjoyable moments with God and in ministry. And more things will be enjoyable because there's rest with God. You see, the disciples had this moment when they come and they stand before Jesus and they start sharing these things. But when we talk about rest, I see that the question I think they pose is the question we need to pose today. We hear this word rest. What is rest? Is that fair, church? I'm going to take a poll this morning. How many of you nap? Take naps? All right? Raise your hand with pride. If you nap, that's a good thing, right? You nap, right? How many of you sleep like more than 6 hours a night? Right? Okay, good. How many of you sleep like 2 hours a night? Right? There may be some medical things with some of that, but some of you just aren't good sleepers, right? But see, a lot of times when we talk about rest, we associate it with closing our eyes and sleeping, right? There's a need for that kind of rest. God has created us that way. There's day and night, right? There's time to close our eyes and sleep. But this morning I want you to see that rest is best done with God with our eyes open, not with our eyes closed. When we're awake and living with God, not just when we're sleeping. You see, because this morning I want you to hear this, that rest is not meant to be a religious act. Sabbath rest is not intended for us, intended to be an item on a sticky note. I want to ask, how many of you are list people here this morning? List people, all right? How many of you make the grocery list for your house? The grocery list, right? First service, same day, we had a lot of women raise their hand, and the guys are like, I don't have a list. Let's go to the store and buy what I see, right? You know? Then that's why your wife gives you a list, because the grocery bill's 10 times more than it's supposed to be, right? And then you come home with things that are, they're called snacks. That's all we eat, snacks. How many of you make lists, like to-do lists? You guys do to-do lists? Yeah. How many of you make lists of the lists you make? How many do that, right? Some of you actually make lists so you can just cross it off, right? You ever do that? You just cross it off. You see, this idea of it not being a religious act. Rest is meant about spending time with God. It's not meant to be a task, but rather, exactly as it says, it's meant to be rest. The Pharisees in Jesus' time, they got this mixed up. They actually made it a religious act. We pick it in Mark chapter 2. It says, on one Sabbath day, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and as disciples walked along, they began to pick up some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? I want you to know, sometimes idiots just need to be confronted. Okay? Can we say that? And Jesus in this time, if you have the impression that Jesus was a guy that walked with his perfectly hemmed coat, and his sandals were clean, and his toenails were prim and proper, right? And he never stirred the pot, that's not Jesus, all right? Jesus walks with his disciples and grabs the grain he's eating. They're not shoplifting from a field, but I think he saw that the teachers of the law were there, and it's a day of Sabbath, so he grabs and he starts eating. And what do the Pharisees do? They're like, oh, it's the day of rest, and he's eating, right? Does that sound a little ludicrous to you? A little bit, right? They made rest such a religious act, a to-do list, a sticky note. Is that everything that happened on the Sabbath, they had to run it through their filter and begin seeing about the do's in the do's and the don'ts, right? Is that you see God establish rest so that we can serve God in some quiet, so that we know Him and get to know Him, and it's called rest. See, we continue on. When Jesus responds to their words, He says this, then He said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of God is Lord even on the Sabbath. Let's put that in 2015 words like palatable thought, understanding. Is what He says is God is still God whether you're eating or sleeping. Whether you're working or you're resting. Like you can't make the Sabbath happen so that you are better with God. God made it because you need rest. That's what He says. And it's probably okay to eat on the Sabbath, right? Like, it's okay to enjoy food when you're with God. It's kind of against what the Scripture teaches. It tells us to break bread with one another, right? He didn't say go hungry. He said spend time and rest with Him. See, when you think about this, He says it's better for the Father. It's better for the Father when we observe the rest. It's better for us. See, over this last month, I have to tell you, I've learned a little more about the rest for myself. I made a few calls leading up to this time of being away with some pastors around the country and just said, hey, what did you do during your Sabbath time? Like, what did you do during rest? How did you do it? I got to be honest with you, no one really helped me. Okay? There wasn't a lot of great help. And the reason there wasn't a lot of great help is because most of the people who take Sabbath rest were in two groups, if I can call it that. One is they were dead and wore out. Or B, they're knocking on heaven's door, like literally, okay? Like that's what it was. And the only thing that I got was good was one guy who I respect fully says, you know what, don't schedule a lot. Like, don't get overscheduled. And I thought that would be easy, right? I thought that would be easy. But I think I rested like 80% of the time, all right? Because I scheduled heavily in some ways.